Welcome to the Monomoy Regional School Committee meeting for Thursday, June 22nd, 2023. We will begin the meeting at 6:30 p.m. And I would like to call the meeting to order. The next on the agenda is public comment. Seeing none, we will move on to the approval of the June 8th, 2023 Monomoy Regional School Committee meeting minutes. Do I have a motion? Are they not in here?
It's all the same thing.
So moved. Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Okay. Then we move right into reports and discussion. And we would like to invite our former school committee member, Sharon Stout. Do you want to stand? Just, so everyone can see you. We wanted to invite you back because of all the years of service that you have provided the district and the community on the school committee, and how lucky we are to have had your voice be part of our committee for so many years. So thank you. I do believe Dr. Carpenter has a...
I just wanted to just share a couple words. I have been mulling for a while now just how important service is, and it's one of these things that I've had conversations even with my own son. If you're at the Air Force Academy, as each cadet first comes in, there's sort of some of the mottos that they walk under, and one talks about service before self. And I work in a profession where I'm surrounded by colleagues who devote their lives to serving children and families in our district, and I work with and for a school committee that volunteers its time to serve the families of our two towns and the children of our two towns. So that concept has always been near and dear to me. So I want to sort of emphasize that Sharon's service to our families and our children spans far more than just this school committee. So I sent Leah on a little task to go find at least a picture of Sharon from days gone by. So we have here a picture of Sharon back in 1993, near and dear to me because that's when I started as an educator. So this like the Where's Waldo up there, but you'll notice in the middle, second row, we have Miss Stout, and just on the back of the sheet, we also have Miss Stout as she is running for the regional school committee, and I wanted to just sort of share a quote that I think speaks to this, that comes from a sermon that Martin Luther King Jr. once shared with his congregation back in 1968, and he talks about if you want to achieve greatness, serve others, and he says, if you want to be important, wonderful. If you want to be recognized, wonderful. If you want to be great, wonderful. But recognize that she who is greatest among you shall be your servant. That's a new definition of greatness. By giving that definition of greatness, it means that everybody can be great because everybody can serve. You don't have to have a college degree to serve. You don't have to make your subject and verb agree to serve. You don't have to know about Plato or Aristotle to serve. You don't have to know about Einstein's theory of relativity to serve. You don't have to know the second theory of thermodynamics and physics to serve. You only need a heart full of grace, a soul generated by love, and you can be that servant. And I think, Sharon, over my 10 years here, the one thing I've come to really appreciate about you is that heart and soul that you have, and how much you care about the kids in our towns. So on behalf of the school committee, I want to present you a plaque.
Well, it's actually been 12, but it has only seemed like 5. So, I'm very grateful for this. And it was this year when we did our portrait of a graduate that the person that was putting that on spoke about finding your why. Actually, each of us on that committee were given a book called Finding Your Why. So my why I've known for a very long time because I come from a family of service, mostly to education, but to other things too. But I can't think of anything better. So I'm grateful for all of you to also serve for our kids. Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh. Here, I'll take this off. Thank you. And I hope we have a lot more. So,
Yeah.
thank you very much
Thank you, Sharon.
for having me
for
in.
coming.
Thank you. Take care.
All right. So moving on, we will now talk about the AP government trip proposal to Washington DC for November 2023 with Mr. Dixon. Hi.
So I think you saw a draft itinerary of the trip. I think that was forwarded to you. The idea is that I'm teaching the AP class for the first time in 5 or 6 years. And the last time we taught it, we did a field trip on a year like this to Iowa, to the Iowa caucuses. I don't think the way things are playing out with the parties kind of in dispute about the role of Iowa, I don't think that an Iowa trip is going to be in the mix for this year. But it occurred to me that it would be it'd be really valuable if we were able to go visit DC. We have some things to leverage, such as former student Grace Fernandez is working in Congressman Keating's office, and I've been in touch with her. It's been helpful about the schedule, so that the plan, as I presented it in that, would be to leave early Wednesday morning, get down there Wednesday morning, spend Wednesday and Thursday on the Hill while people still are on the Hill and things are happening on the Hill, and then spend Friday and Saturday doing museums and things like that. Thank you. And you made it look nicer than I did. And then we'd be there Saturday for Veterans Day. And actually, there was another trip a number of years ago, a stand trip, where we were there and able to be at the Veterans Day ceremony in Arlington National Cemetery. And it was really powerful. It was really cold that day, I remember, but it was a really powerful thing to be there for. So the timing would work well for that, and then come back on Sunday. They'd miss 2 days of school, I believe, because I believe Friday would be the observed Veterans Day. So I believe we don't have school on that Friday. And I think we'd get a lot out of the trip. And it's very much in draft form. I estimate the cost for students at $500, and that's if I can act now, because flights are actually pretty cheap at the moment. And there's a hotel that I've stayed at once before with students, the Holiday Inn, that's right by the Air and Space, and they've got fairly affordable rates right at the moment. And so, with your approval, I would try and strike while the iron's hot, contact parents, and see if we can get signed up for the trip in the next couple of weeks. I think what we might do is make it that if come fall, some other kids want to go on, we might be able to reopen it. It might cost more at that point because the marginal cost would be additional. But I'd like to try and nail this down. I think $500 is a pretty reasonable rate for a 5-day trip. So, any questions?
Ms. Ebert-Long?
How are you?
How many kids are in the AP government program?
So what we have now is the requests. They have not run the master schedule, so we haven't ironed out exactly who might, have, if singletons end up in conflict, say AP Gov and AP Bio, hopefully not those two, but sometimes with all the APs there are conflicts. So sometimes it doesn't fit in particular kid's schedule. So it might end up that someone signs up with the trip and ends up not an AP, which may mean that we were able to replace, one for one a kid, or it might mean a kid goes on the trip who happens to not be in the AP, and that would be fine too. But the number signed up is of primaries actually 29, which would be a lot if that ended up as my AP government section. But they're probably, I think typically that ends up a little bit smaller. So I'm guessing it'll end up around 24. And in my initial reach out to students, there were a number that were very positive, and there were a few that were, going to pass on it, and so it's certainly not required for people in the class.
So you're, it's just one section for the year? So it's not across the grades?
No, it'd be one section. I guess I expect it's going to be around 24.
And are they mainly juniors, or?
Mostly seniors, but it is
Seniors.
open
Okay.
all the way down to freshmen, that course. But it typically is seniors, because typically, for kids to take it another year, they'd be doubling up on social studies. Senior, they don't have a required social studies, so
Okay.
often that's what slots in as their social studies for senior year.
Great, I love the DC trip, so, and any way we can incorporate it, so excited, thank you.
Any other questions, comments? So it's on for a potential vote because our next school committee meeting isn't until the middle of July, and if you're trying to strike while the iron is hot.
That would be great, and I apologize for it, but this sort of came together last week, and that's why I was emailing you if you were thinking, hopefully I can get on the agenda.
So without exact amounts, are we comfortable as a committee to vote on this tonight?
Yeah, we didn't ask our normal questions. Is there insurance on this trip, Mr. Dixon?
Now, so typically, when I've done DC trips in the past, I don't do it through a tour company.
Okay.
I book the flights as a group flights. I book the hotel rooms, and so it would be up to the people going on it. And so for them, anytime you buy a flight, I guess I don't know. I'd have to look into how insurance would work on it.
No, you actually
Yeah.
answered the question right away, that you're not doing it through a tour company, so it's absolutely independent of that. And
Yeah.
yes, the people who are signed up can get
It
their
would
own.
be up to them.
Yeah,
to
exactly.
have their own insurance.
That's fine.
Any other questions? Do I have a motion? Ms. Seibert-Long?
I move to approve the AP government trip to Washington DC from Wednesday, November 8th to Sunday, November 12th.
I would second that.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? All right, looks like you can start planning.
Thank you very much.
Let
If
us
there's-
know.
Of course, if anything significant changes, I would be in touch and contact for your approval of any potential changes. Hopefully there
Perfect.
won't be.
Hopefully there won't.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Happy summer.
Happy summer to you.
Okay. Well, I've lost my agenda. Oh, it's all stapled.
It's the staple
It's
packet.
the staple, it's getting
It was
me.
like 4 o'clock and it was like, back at
Okay, moving on. We are moving on to the recognition of retiring Monomoy staff.
Just each year, the school committee oftentimes will send a letter out just to our staff members who have retired. So I think Leah has put together letters for the retirees, but I just want to at least quickly name off who is retiring. The big surprise to everyone yesterday, it was 2 days ago for me, is that my fishing buddy Gordon Napier announced that he's going to retire. So that was just after the middle school buses had taken the children off. Gordon stepped out on the curb to let his colleagues know that he was retiring. So we'll be searching for a middle school band director. Gordon was with us for 20 years. Matt Brown a high school history teacher with us for 14 years. Sue Rush, who had been, when I started here, at the middle school or at the middle school in Chatham initially, and then Monomoy Regional Middle School, and has been for the last several years at Harwich Elementary School as a first grade teacher. Sue had been with us for 20 years. Leslie Simmons, 33 years at Harwich Elementary as an elementary teacher. Jill Malinowski, who has been most of her time at Chatham Elementary School, but this past year at Harwich Elementary School as a guidance counselor, 16 years. Marianne Bragdon, who has been a teacher at Harwich Elementary School for 28 years. Janet Farrow, the administrative assistant here, or one of the administrative assistants here at the high school, 8 years, and a middle school instructional assistant, Kathy Azone, who had been here for the past year.
Excellent. Congratulations. I hope they all enjoy retirement. All right, moving right along to the OPEB presentation. Mr. McMillan, there you are.
So we wanted to do, for the last presentation of this school year, we wanted to do something really exciting that really grab you by the seat of your pants. So we're going to do post-employment benefits.
Ba-doop.
Yes. You want to jump to the first slide? So really the thinking behind this was, this is a reoccurring part of our budget every year, but it's also something that's not maybe known very widely and understood even less because it's complicated stuff. And we just thought it might be worth revisiting this and just give you a bit of an overview of where we are and what the numbers look like on this issue. So I'm going to start from, so it's called Other Post-Employment Benefits. So this is benefits, which are health, dental, and life insurance benefits, which are paid to retirees. So that's the post-employment benefits bit. And the other bit is just that it doesn't include retirement. So this is not actually a retirement we're talking about. It's just our health insurance that we pay to retirees. So a while ago, back in 2004, prior to that, the federal government, amongst other people, began to become concerned about this looming, growing cost to all organizations, because we're on the hook for paying for the health insurance cost of retirees. And unlike retirement, that is also an issue, unlike retirement costs, the healthcare costs are borne by the local organizations. So for retirement costs, that's borne by the state for teachers, and we're part of Barnstable County paying for retirements of other staff, other than those covered by mass teachers. So there's some there's state, regional control of that, oversight of that, and so it's a bit more active and a bit more controlled, not that it's not an issue. But OPEB, other post-employment benefits, are just all us small organizations, I mean, not always small, but in our case, relatively small organizations, and we are dealing with that ourselves. And the federal government and others began to be concerned that it wasn't very clear, nobody was really paying enough attention to this, that it was not, we weren't all measuring it in the same way, and I'll come on to that in a minute. And there wasn't the organizations, when they were looking at their budget and their forecasting, they weren't really taking this into consideration, even though it is going to be an issue. So they issued the Government Accounting Standards Board. See, I told you this is going to be exciting. So the Government Accounting Standard Board issued some directions back in 2004, and they were updated with further ones in 2017 with new reporting requirements. So basically what happened is we had to start recognizing this liability, these benefits which we were due to pay. We had to start recognizing that liability in our annual audit reports. And the idea was that the rules that GASB, the Government Accounting Standards Board, set down would improve transparency, so we'd all be on the same page, we would be doing it in the same way, we'd all be accountable, and we'd be doing it consistently. So that was the easy bit, right? Where it starts to get complicated is how you calculate what your post-employment benefit liability is. So we are liable to the health insurance costs of all our current retirees and our current employees for when they retire. And so our actuary, we employ an actuary firm who spend a lot of time analyzing, life expectancies, the mortality rates, and the age of our staff as we bring on our new staff, how long basically, how many of our staff are going to retire with us, and then once they've retired, how long they're going to live, and how much our health insurance costs are going to be over that period. And because we're talking, a new person we're hiring right now in their 20s, we if they stay with us, we could own their retirement benefits, 60, 70, 80 years out. So this is so it becomes more and more complicated. And they apply the discount rate, which is how they calculate the present day cost of future money. So how much $100 costs in 60 years, they use a discount rate, which I won't go into much detail on because I'll quickly get lost. But basically, what the value of that is today. So they take all that into, and every year our auditor, the actuary looks at our numbers, our staffing numbers, and every couple of years. The last time they did it was 2020. We're waiting for updated numbers now. And then our auditor applies discount rates to calculate the actual value every year. So if you go to the next slide. So let me just recap. We have this looming issue of post-employment benefits. People are living longer and a higher rate of people are retiring. Fewer people are coming into the workforce, more are going out. That's part of the reason it became this concern. So the federal government brings up these new regulations. Everyone has to start reporting it, and so that's what Monomoy does. We're a relatively young organization, and so interestingly, when Monomoy was created, anybody who'd retired from Harwich or Chatham stayed with Harwich and Chatham. So those towns are responsible for their retirees. So when we started back in, in 2011 to 13, we had very few retirees, and because we started with 0, and only once we'd formed, as people started to retire, that's when the number increased. So we're up to, and back in 2020, when we last had the actuary look at it, we had 178 retirees. But unlike some organizations where they've kind of, if you're 100 years old or you're Chatham or Harwich, you've got a relatively stable number of retirees. The number, might be creeping up a little bit, but you've got as many coming out as you have coming in as you have going out, who unfortunately when they die at 82 or above, and the life expectancy is about 82. So you have a relatively stable number, whereas for us, we've got, we have very few people dying since we formed, retirees dying, but we have more retiring, so our numbers just keep going up. And so in order to try and get an idea of when we would start to level off in the number of retirees, and these are all just assumptions, the superintendent and I looked at the average age of retiring, which is around 62 and a quarter for Monomoy, and the average life expectancy in Massachusetts, which is around 82 and a half. So there's obviously lots of assumptions going on in there, but so that means we've really got about 20 years before we'll start to see, someone who retired when we were started in 2011-12, before we'll start to see life expectancy numbers start to impact our overall number of retirees. Does that make sense? Okay, so our numbers will keep going up, we think, until around 2031, 32, and then at that point, the number of retirees we're responsible for will start to level off. And then we'll have the cost to the district each year of their benefits will just go up in line with the increase to health costs. And that's all about we're understanding how much the annual cost is to us. So right now, the annual cost is, it's around 800,000 going on for $1 million. And we think by the time this is leveled off, it could be as much as $2 to $2.5 million a year we're paying. So this is how much we're paying per year in post-retirement benefits. So that's a pretty big chunk of our budget. And that doesn't include retirement for non-teacher staff. So in addition to that, and we're already paying more than $1 million for pension costs to non-teaching staff, because we have to pay the employer part of that. So you're looking over the next 10 years that this, these retirement benefits, both OPEB and retirement costs, pension costs, will be around $4 million, which is like 10% of our budget, and that's annually. So that's a pretty big number. All right. Doesn't get much more exciting than that. If you want to go to the next slide. So in response to the new regulations from the federal government, the Monomoy joined, the school committee approved the setting up of a OPEB fund, and then we joined the Plymouth County OPEB Trust, which is basically, it's run out of Plymouth County, but it's a group, several public sector organizations who essentially input every time we contribute to our OPEB fund, which is in the budget every year, we put in $100,000 pretty much. So we put that money in the fund, and then we give that money to Plymouth County, that should say OPEB Trust, and they invest that money for us. And because we're part of a bigger organization, we have, we have lower fees, and we're able to invest that money and get some returns back. So, just to recap, the federal government said, look, you need to start paying attention to this OPEB liability. And the first thing you need to do is start reporting it. So we started reporting it. And then we started to think about what this is going to cost. And so we set up this fund to start essentially saving money to help us pay for these costs in the future. And the district has been putting in about $100,000 a year into this fund. But that's, it's like a drop in the bucket, right? So $100,000, I think, if you go to the next slide, actually. So this is our calculated OPEB liability. So if you start, this table has, 4 columns of data. The first is our figures as of June 2021. And then the next column is our Monomoy's figures as of June 2022. And then the last 2 columns are Chatham and Harwich. And the first line is the total OPEB liability. So back in 21, our OPEB liability was almost $70 million. So that's the total cost. So that's like if we stopped doing business tomorrow, we would have the potential liability of around $70 million in OPEB, post-employment benefit costs for all our existing retirees and all our current staff when they retired. Now, the following year, it was down to $60 million, not because any of our numbers changed, but because the discount rate changed because of everything that's been going on with COVID and inflation. That's affected the discount rate, which is how they calculate the value of that, of all us paying out those benefits from now until 60 years from now. The total cost of that went down because of inflation. But so, and I'm sure it will change again next year. But it's still, if you're $60, $70 million, it's still a lot of money, and the discount rate's not going to change it that much. We have put in almost $1 million. So we have invested that money. We had been making some money through our investments, but over the last year or so, we lost a lot of money because of the way the market went in 2022. So our funding ratios, how much of that liability we've funded through savings through our OPEB fund, is around like 1.5%. So federal government said, you need to pay attention to this. We said, okay, we'll pay attention to it. We started saving up for it, and we've got a small amount of money saved away. Now, some districts, some towns, not so many districts, but some towns have started to say, okay, I've started to really focus on this. And they're aiming to have like 100% funded. They want all that money in a bank account. And so they started putting more and more money into a bank account. So the town of Chatham, they're up to about 21%. Town of Chatham's up to almost 20% of their fund, of their liability is funded, whereas Harwich is still at like almost 12%. These days, Harwich information, I could not find up-to-date information. They've just got a new finance director. So that's a year old, but you get a sense of where they are. So we're obviously a lot less than that. So There's a question about the benefits of having a more fully funded OPEB liability. One of the main benefits is that when you go to borrow, your credit rating, when it's calculated, they will look at how much money you've saved for your OPEB. So our actuary and our auditor advises that what they care about most is that you're just consistently contributing to it. You don't care so much about how much it is, just that you have one and you're consistently putting money into it. And that will affect your borrowing costs. So although we haven't saved a lot, we haven't put a lot in our fund, we have put some, and that helps. The other real benefit I can see is that eventually, when the costs start, so if we had it fully funded, so say we had a fund of $60 million, then that would be, just the interest on that we would gain would help to offset the costs of our post-employment benefit costs every year. So it's a bit like, saving money to help offset future costs. But aside from that, I'm not sure, it's of great, I'm not sure if our staff and students really thank us for having $60 million sitting in a bank account. Because we're never going to have to pay all that all out at once. So a lot of it would literally just sit there and we would use that to offset other costs, to offset the costs of those liabilities as they increased, of those costs as they increased. So, we can get into a sort of more detailed conversation about the value of having a really fully funded OPEB fund, but it's an interesting challenge, and especially we have Chatham and Harwich up there, their OPEB liabilities will be less than ours, so it's a little easier for them to start to put the money aside. And so they used to have all the school staff going into their retirement pool, but that stopped because they started coming to Monomoy instead. So their numbers are actually probably, then I'm sure it'll be reflected in their total estimated liability. So they don't have their pools growing like we do, because all those school staff are coming to Monomoy and not going to Harwich and Chatham, which also makes their life a little easier. All right, that's it. So there's this issue with looming post-employment benefits. We are putting a little bit of money aside, but not a great amount. And over a long time, that is going to be an increasing part of our budget. And, it's going to creep up. So it's not like, we're going to, each year I'm going to come and I'm going to say, okay, so, when I present the budget in the fall, I'm going to have a number for how much retirement's gone up and how much post-employment benefits have gone up as part of our health insurance. And that's going to be an increasing number. It's not going to be, and all of a sudden, it's not going to go up $1 million over in 1 year, but it might go up, $1.5 million over 10 years. So each year, it'll be that kind of incremental growth. So when we're putting our budget together, we just need to keep adding another $100,000 for post-employment benefits. And that's, going to put pressure on us and put pressure on the towns and, put pressure on our budget to not take those costs from other parts of our budget to just keep offsetting post-employment benefits.
Leah, can you put that last slide up again?
The other thing to think about, just one other factor, just while we're waiting for that, is what happens with our staffing. So if over the next 10 years we start to see enrollment going down, and then if staffing then goes down alongside that by who knows what numbers, but then that will reduce our OPEB because we'll have fewer staff in order to retire. It will also mean as our budget goes down, what we have left, OPEB will be a bigger part of our budget because our budget won't have gone up as much as our OPEB might have done.
Any questions?
Well, Jackie has a question. I just wanted to, kind of, if we just look at the last slide and think about this as an organization, in the last 10-ish years, we've gone from a OPEB liability in the fiduciary net position of 0 to to a decade later of almost $1 million a year. And you can imagine as we move, another 10 years out, that number's going to almost double, while on the town side, those numbers are likely to start slowly coming down as there are fewer educators who are being covered by these. So it's almost as if you think of the balance sheet, that there's going to be funds that are shifting from that side of the town's ledger over to where our OPEB is. And I know that it's, this isn't one of these like big gripping presentations, but I know that we're going to have our treasurer come here in the next meeting or so and present what the latest OPEB number is, and I wanted to at least give people a primer in what OPEB is all about, because that number is clearly going to be a lot bigger than what it is, what this number is, and it has that potential each year to be another increase in our budget year after year after year. And the reason that the auditors want municipalities to stay on top of this is that there's this worry and fear that that number becomes so big it can be unsustainable. It's also interesting to be part now of a regional school district where there are towns out there who have chosen to do overrides to bank the money, or have some new funds that you'll have OPEB fully funded by a town. Well, we don't have a taxing mechanism. We're a regional school district, and you have the potential that the town of Chatham may address OPEB, the town of Harwich may fully address OPEB, and we either have to put more into our budgets or make sure that we're being part of those conversations, because ultimately the educators for the families and children of the two towns are part of both towns' OPEB challenges.
Yeah.
So the total liability for June, up to June 30th, 2022 is
Yeah.
roughly 60 million,
Yep.
of which our position is that we can contribute 901,222 because we're
Yep.
putting 100,000 roughly
Yep.
away every year
Yep.
and we're investing it.
Yep.
Then that leaves a net OPEB liability of the 58 million,
Yeah.
of which 1.5% of it
I know essentially $900,000 is like 1.5% of 60
is
million.
only 1.5%
Yeah,
of the
exactly. Yeah.
50, okay. So, and we're funding that net liability through,
So the net liability is the total cost of this, over the next 100 years, or however long they look out, 60 years. So we'll never have to pay it all at once.
okay,
We pay it in incremental increases. So right now it's about $800,000, $900,000 a year.
great.
Over the next 10 years, I think could get up to about $2 million a year. So you start to think, so if you look that out, eventually that will get to 60 million, but it's over the next 50 years.
So right now with what we're putting away and investing, we've been managing to cover.
So actually, the money we're putting away, we haven't touched that yet. We just put it away and it sits in a bank account. Meanwhile, we're using like $1 million a year out of our budget to pay for our current costs.
Okay,
So the liability is basic. So every year we pay OPEB costs. We pay for people's retiree health insurance
out of our budget.
out of our budget.
And we're putting
And we're putting money
100,000.
aside for the rainy day.
Okay,
Meanwhile, the OPEB liability is just the total of that, how much they think we're going to have to pay over the next, I'm not sure the timeline, I think it's like 50, I think it's like 60 years.
so then I guess my question is,
Yeah.
are we at the point where we're having the conversation that we should be putting away more than 100,000 a
That's
year
the question.
to help start, I mean, we need to move with the pattern here.
Yeah, I mean, it's a bit like,
And what's your recommendation, Michael?
it's a really good question, school committee member. I think it's worth, I think we should start having the conversation. He said avoiding the question. I think we should at least make sure the towns are aware of what's going on. Because, if Chatham are hoping to have their fund fully funded, so they are wanting to have up to 100% in over the next 10 years or so. So they need to be aware. I think we need to involve them in the conversation. I think at least part of the budget, we should say, hey, look, this is where, we should have a slide like this as part of our budget, where we just say, this is OPEB liability, this is where it is right now, this is where it was 10 years ago. Everybody's still on the same page, that this is how we're treating it. I would like to have that conversation with the select boards and say, because I think I can see the appeal of having $60 million in a bank account and thinking, all right, we're all set. We don't need to worry about this anymore. But I am also aware that means we're taking money away from
That's not feasible.
either we're taking money away from school supplies and salaries and positions, or we're saying to the towns, hey, we need an extra $500,000 a year so we can start building this up over the next 20, 30 years. I don't know. Yeah, I feel like that neither of those are attractive options. But, maybe they say to towns, hey, if you're planning to, once you get to fully funded on EuroPEP, can you just start sending the money? Maybe we have some agreement with them. So if anybody's listening at home, I'm
You're
not
so
proposing
funny.
this. Hey, I'm just saying, maybe we talk to the towns about what do you,
What's their plan?
they're our key stakeholders. What do they think our strategy should be?
And you can imagine the, at times, tension just over
Yeah.
excess and deficiency account, which is a couple
Yep.
million, not 60 million. And, and is this something that the towns want to support the school district doing? Because clearly, both towns are funding OPEB more aggressively than we are, but we need to have their support in having this in our budgets.
Yeah.
So is the next step to have conversations with the towns?
So I think
For us?
the next step is I'll come back and give you another update on this when we get the most up-to-date figures. So our actuary is working on looking at the number of retirees, looking at the number of employees, looking at all those those factors, and then on the back of that we'll have an update to the number, our total liability cost, and that will be over the next couple of months. And then I think we should include this as part of our budget, and then when it comes to doing the FY25 budget, we can talk to this. We can just make sure the towns. This is part of the discussion with the towns.
Any other questions, comments?
I was
see
just
right
going to comment that you got to exactly what I was thinking. I was like, oh God, this is like excess and deficiency, and they're
Yeah.
always like, oh, well, how come you have this much money in this account?
Yeah.
And so it's going to be on steroids. It's going to be a difficult conversation, but they've got to be doing something too, in which case we could justify if they're
Yes,
doing
exactly.
it.
Yeah, they
that-
must have it sitting somewhere.
They must have it sitting
That
somewhere
Right.
somehow.
21.1%.
And you can easily justify increasing that amount just based on the numbers. I'm assuming that the amount of teachers that are retiring versus as the number of teachers that we require as the district shrinks, because it's
Yeah.
shrinking, is, I don't want to say that it's a benefit, but is it not enough that you think this trend will go in our
that's-
favor at some point?
So reductions in number of positions is not reflected in those numbers. So that they're just looking at, like, right now, if you keep this number of positions, these staff you have, it's actually based on, like, the staff you have right now. They look at the age of all your staff and their salary and their benefits, and then the same for your retirees, and that's how they calculate your total cost. But if we start to reduce the number of positions, so you reduce 10 positions, and some of those people might retire, but they were already reflected, and they're not replaced, and some other people resign and go somewhere else, then they come off your list. And so the next time we look at the figures, our liability will be adjusted to reflect that. So it will reduce the cost, but it's not directly because
It's not
you
gonna be
still have
enough.
a
It's gonna be too
retiree.
slow, too.
Yeah, and and you then, but you own those retirement costs and those post-employment benefit costs forever. So you own them as long as that person draws on those benefits. And so you have some towns, for whichever reason, don't do anything else anymore, because they say they're really small towns, really where they don't run any of their own services. All they do is pay post-employment benefits, because they're like, so say you're, sometimes if you've been in whatever reason, you're a school district, this is in other parts of the country, you're a school district which is not part of the municipality, but it sends all their students somewhere else and just pays that. They're basically just paying one district to do their students, and they're paying their post-employment benefits. And that's all they're doing. We're not going to get to that, but that's that thing. These benefits those costs don't go away, and so we'll always be responsible for them.
Dr. Carpenter?
This
Sorry.
is, part of a conversation Michael and I were having in terms of how complex this is and how intertwined it can be with a lot of other challenges. So one of the things I have been sharing with the committee and the community is it's becoming harder and harder for us to hire young staff on Cape Cod. What we're finding more often than not, and today is an example of that. I hired somebody who is established on Cape Cod, top step on the salary scale. They're the person, that was best in the in a relatively small applicant pool. The individual will likely be here 10-ish or so years before retirement. But we own that individual for, the next, as Michael said, average age is 62 for retirement, average.
Living to
you know,
92.
Average, lifespan 82.5 in Massachusetts. So, so they're with us for 10 years. We're still fiscally responsible for the next, on average, 20 years, 20 years out. So you can even, think about there's something I was, kind of waxing poetically with Michael. It's just broken with the system globally where there will be people who the bulk of their career might not have been with Monomoy, but we own them if we're the last stop. And that's part of the actuarial's calculations. And, and ideally, if you're able to hire people who are, first, second, third year teachers, and they're with you for the next 30 years, they're with you, and then the 20-ish years after retirement, that you're still paying them out. But there's some people who may be with you only a couple of years, and then you are still owning that, those retirement costs, for the next 20 years post-retirement.
So why can't we fix the system so that each school that you work in has some percentage of that?
So that's really interesting. So they did try that. I believe when they first started, that was the rule, but it was just so complicated trying to track down. I mean, I'll get the full information for you for the next presentation, but I feel like that was.
See, I think that would be a fairer approach to the system.
Yeah.
Like really intelligent one.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
Yeah.
Except, it just seems that especially now, we have so much help to organize that kind of information that, if somebody did it, it would essentially come down to a button.
Yeah.
Right.
And your
Calculate.
history would come up and the percentage of what each.
Yeah.
Michael, you're very smart. Could you do that, please? Just take care of that?
By my next meeting.
All right.
Perfect.
Well, and then I guess that brings up I'm always great with these ideas, but, we're looking at it from one end, but looking at it from another end, we're going into negotiations, and a larger
Yeah.
question is, what can we still afford to do, and what can't we afford to do as a district? I mean, is there any compensation, is pulling back on something and giving a higher salary? Like, what would be, you know, we can give a higher salary for a shorter amount of, for 10 years, 15 years, if we don't have to pay the extra 30 years of benefits. You know, what does that look like? Are there any models out there that look like that? Would someone come and not take the benefits because of a spouse and then, I mean, I don't know. I really don't know enough about it, but I'm saying, let's look at the other side of it too.
that goes-
And what can we
that's a-
control on that side?
Yeah,
That goes back to that, you know, people on, public servants don't get Social Security, you know, this is
Yeah.
what you get.
yeah,
And so playing with that, you know,
yeah.
so you're 25 and you get a higher salary and you have kids
Yeah.
and then you're 63 and guess what? You're still paying for kids and you're
Yeah.
still paying college, you're still paying for weddings and you're paying
Yeah.
for, and so the disequilibrium is,
Yeah,
it's really hard to figure out that, so.
I think, yeah, you're asking a good question. And about what we can do to reduce those costs. But I mean, I guess, I think one of the attractive things about working in education, you have these things covered and you have a good, pension scheme and everything. So I don't know.
I want a pension.
That's how that's one of the recruitment mechanisms. That's why people come work for us. You know, another thing is like the percentage split on our health insurance, because that influences this whole calculation as well.
Right.
We have the split
But
on the
it's
health
been-
insurance, the type of plan you choose.
Yeah.
Maybe you go with a higher
Deductible.
plan,
Higher deductible.
a higher
plans. Yeah.
deductible, something, that costs the district less, but costs the insured more, unfortunately. But
Yeah,
somehow you gotta work from both ends, because you can't just keep picking
Yeah.
off the tree and,
but then I totally agree. And to your point about the whole bigger picture, it's like, but we're also fighting for staff, so we don't want to make it less attractive to come and work here.
Right.
So it's so difficult. But,
Mr. Russell?
I agree with what you folks said. We had
Thanks.
this conversation 10 years ago, and that $60 million, it's almost impossible for this committee, all right, the individual school committee, to address it with options that are beyond us.
turn your mic on.
I didn't want anyone to hear what I was saying. Now I'll say, I think it's a wonderful idea. It's been with us tonight. Tax-creating municipalities can address that and look at it, and some are and some aren't. School systems that have no taxability, there is no real answer to all of a sudden. Now we can briefly talk about, every 3 years, a contract. We can ask our colleagues, and they'll be happy to help us with OPEB. Of course they wouldn't. I mean, I don't blame them.
Yeah,
So this came to us X number of years ago without any type of options. If there were booming state years and the state could give school systems money directed at OPEB, then you could drop that down. But the more we kind of carve out time to say, well, gee, how do we reduce 60 million without touching our own budget? Well, every year our budget is tight to begin
Yeah.
with. So it's just my voice of frustration. I mean, there is no quick answer. Well, let's find out what Wellesley does, which probably wouldn't be a bad idea. Some towns are so wealthy,
yeah,
they buy out. I think Chatham has been talking about doing that for the next couple of years. We're not in that position.
Anything else? So you'll come back to us with an update, and we'll
Yep.
keep talking about this very exciting
Yeah,
topic,
absolutely.
but necessary.
Yeah.
Yeah,
You'll be quizzed on it next meeting.
Yeah,
that's right.
thank you.
Thanks, Michael. All right, moving on to strategic plan development, discussion on the process and facilitation moving forward. Is that you, Dr. Carpenter?
Sure. I wanted to start the conversation. So we, this year went through the Portrait of the Graduate exercise, and the plan has been this year Portrait of the Graduate, next year launch into a new strategic planning phase. And then there's the age-long question that happens every time we have this conversation. Facilitation not facilitation, do we hire, do we hire a group to run the process for us or not? So we do carry within the school committee's budget monies for strategic planning. This past year, we used TLA as the consultant to run the process for the Portrait of the Graduate. Included in that was some graphic design monies. That was about $18,500 for TLA. They have services, there are other companies that have services, and we've talked about sort of the range of different things that we've done. We have in the past hired a facilitator, let's say in the neighborhood of a few $1,000s to facilitate some public meetings, and internally done it. We have hired TLA, which was, they did the facilitation of the meetings, they collected the notes, and even with a facilitator, there was a lot that was happening behind the scenes, with Joy and Mark and I. And when we did it with our, just hired a person, not a company, for the previous strategic plan, there was similarly a lot of work that went behind the scenes when we were, largely running it ourselves. But I just wanted to get a feel from the table on, do you want me to look for facilitators and get quotes from TLA and others to run it, to run strategic planning the same way that we got quotes for Portrait of the Graduate? Do you want to see us look towards, maybe somebody who could moderate or, lead some public sessions and have us internally do it? Again, I feel very comfortable with us doing that as well. Or which direction does the committee want to go? I think we are carrying a placeholder in the budget for $25,000. Doesn't mean we have to spend $25,000 for it, but we have a placeholder for facilitation, which could be bringing in a company, and some of those monies could be some of the supplies that are needed to go run the process behind the scenes.
Scott, what were some of the things that had to happen behind the scenes that you were responsible for?
So I think, I'm happy to let Mark or Joy, speak to it, but I think we, did a lot of planning. I think while we had facilitators, there was a lot of collaborative planning, behind the scenes on that. Do I think that, that some combination of Mark, Joy, and I could do it with, without a consulting firm? I think you've got a lot of strength that you've hired as a committee that could do it. I actually do think having somebody somebody externally to facilitate the meetings, I think is helpful. I think it puts me in a place to be part of a conversation and not being the one leading it. And I wouldn't want to put anyone on the school committee in that role unless that's what they really wanted. So but I think that that's what we did 4 years ago, 4 years now, 5 years now. So, and that was in the neighborhood all in, the consultant with other things, less than, I think, $5,000 to do that versus, hiring a firm at 18.5 plus some supply costs.
Well, I think specifically my question is, were the three of you working behind the scenes because the facilitation wasn't effective or efficient?
I think that we were working behind the scenes to help make it effective for us. So I think sometimes it's hard for an external organization that's not part of here to come in and really do, like, I think you'd have to have boots on the ground to kind of do what, I think it worked well. But it's not like Mark and Joy weren't doing a lot of things with me behind the scenes too.
Mark Smith, Director of Curriculum Instruction and Assessment. So, yeah, I mean, just to run off what Dr. Carpenter is saying is, like, there's certain things that an outside organization needs. Like, so they needed, the committee, the Portrait of Graduate Committee needed to look through a bunch of our district data. So I put together all that data and put it in a folder for the consultants to then, or put the team through a process. They needed support and recruitment for who was going to be in that process. Joy did the recruitment, right? Then there was sort of making it Monomoy and like something that reflected us. That was like a three of us took, they were able to facilitate the process, but we put the Monomoy part on ultimately what we've seen, right? As far as like the language goes. And so there was a lot of back and forth because we work here, they don't work here. So there was, to run along with what Dr. Carpenter is saying, I think there's definitely a lot of benefit to having somebody facilitate, because then we get to participate. If myself or anybody's truly facilitating, then you really have to step out and you can't be a participant. You're just running the meeting. When you have an outside facilitator to run whatever the strategic planning process is, then you get to participate. But I'm not sure we need somebody, like, we could set up the process and have somebody facilitate the meetings so that we could participate in the meetings. I would agree with Dr. Carpenter.
I do think that Gary Maestas and Pam Gould, who did that facilitating for TLA, I thought they did a great job of facilitating the meetings, and I thought they were very responsive in terms of working with them. But I think we had this big, it was a big debate at the table that I think three maybe of the school committee members currently weren't part of. It's like, like what level of facilitation and what level of a firm do we want to have? And I think it was just important for us to start having the conversation.
Joy Jordan, Community Engagement Coordinator for the district. Just to give a little bit of history, I think that might address some of your questions, Scotty, and for the rest of you that weren't here, almost exactly 5 years ago, we started pulling together various community members, family members, students, teachers, staff, the whole kind of gamut of folks that we wanted involved. And that's something that we did internally. We worked on the lists, we sent out the invitations, we did follow-up, we had our SVPs, and as noted, we did essentially the same thing for the Portrait of a Graduate, because again, any facilitator or organization isn't going to know our community, isn't going to know who to reach out to. So we did that, and then we had the actual sort of event planning aspect of the forum, which Leah and I mostly handled and are perfectly capable of handling again, because we do that kind of thing all the time. And we took down the notes that were used and all of those sorts of things. So I think we are totally able to do it ourselves. I mean, I think, especially considering, I think all three of us were a month or two into our roles. We all had just started and then pulled off this big event that was an all-day event and had 115 attendees participating, and came out of it with a really successful strategic plan. I think with 5 more years under our belts, we could easily handle the sort of pre-work and the actual event logistics just fine. I agree that an outside facilitator is helpful for that little bit of a move, but other than that, I think.
Mr. Russell?
Why don't we follow the model of the Portrait of a Graduate? That seems to me, I was not involved, seems to me to have been effective. We came up with a product. So that, in the light of that, without spending a great deal of money, why do we take the same idea, carve out enough money to have a facilitator where these three leaders feel it's needed, and then create the same model. Out of those three comes another volunteer group of us, and we begin to target the first of many meetings, the first being a large group. And I would suggest, if there's 25,000, I don't see the need actually to spend all of that, but if you took 15,000 and you hired for 5,000 a facilitator, and then the other 10 take a second hard look as to, is the group that we just had, are they able to just rejoin us and follow up with the legwork on the strategic plan?
You see right along?
I think I'm on the same line as Terry. I just wrote a couple notes down just to review. We had roughly around 40,000 in the budget for Portrait of a Graduate strategic plan. We did Portrait of a Graduate first, which was 18,000, which leaves us around 20, whatever. And again, we don't have to spend it all. TLA, I just don't remember if their strength with Portrait of the Graduate and strategic plan they could do, but it wasn't their strength, or?
I think it was the reverse. So
Was it the reverse?
so we
Strategic
were-
plan was their strength, but Portrait of the Graduate
Right,
not. But
right.
that's worked. It's been fine. And now they're actually familiar with all of the data because they've done Portrait of the Graduate. So it actually would be, if we were to have a facilitator, like Terry's mentioning, TLA would kind of be a seamless way to support the three of you if you wanted to do it. And if you were in support of that, that seems to make sense instead of reintroducing a new company into this. And then I had one more. Oh, darn it. Oh, yeah. I lost it. Went right out the door. So the only thing I would say is, I mean, just come back to the committee with what you think the plan should look like, what it looks like with a facilitator, without a facilitator, or fully facilitated without you guys involved, 3 options to the board.
And we do
Go from
have a strategic planning subcommittee that includes Ryan and Scotty, so maybe that's something that you could meet with Ryan and Scotty and Mark and Joy and kind of come up with,
Yeah, so
a more solid plan.
So why don't we plan on, in July, connecting as a strategic planning subcommittee? I can reach out to TLA, and I can even reach out to, the facilitator that we had 5 years ago, and sort of talk through what each could look like.
And it might be nice for Ryan and Scotty to have TLA, chat with you even over Zoom during that meeting so that you can get more familiar with TLA and what that process was. Ms. Seabright Long?
The only other thing I was gonna say is, full support for the 3 of you. I have full trust that the 3 of you could pull this off, if it's the 3 of you. If it's not, it's a different conversation.
Right. Let's start with strategic planning subcommittee. And you'll pull that together, Dr. Carpenter?
Yeah, we'll schedule it for, it's okay, after the July 4th.
Get through the holiday. She's ready to go tomorrow.
Red, white, and blue away. No
That's
more
right.
fireworks.
Do you think you'll do it before our,
Brian and I ended up on this important committee. I think they're throwing us to the room.
No, it's important people, Scotty.
Oh, yeah.
It's important people.
before our next
Thank you
meeting?
so
Do you
much.
think?
You're welcome.
Is our next meeting the 15th, 12th? The 12th, before, maybe?
Maybe. Again, I don't know how much everybody that we'd be potentially reaching out to is also.
Got it. So
It's summer
either,
mode.
so you'll meet and then either report back July or August to everybody?
Yeah.
Excellent. Any other questions? Oh, Dr.
I have a
Mr.
question, and
Russell?
it's just oversimplified in my mind because I was not on that strategic committee. Let's assume that we're finished, but not polished up with the portrait of a graduate, but it's at that stage. And let's assume at some point in that multi-page descriptor, there would be 3, 4, 5 sub categories, what does a graduate really need to grasp hold of? If those assumptions are sort of real, wouldn't our strategic plan group, as they move forward, be wise to identify those 5, 3, 4 subcommittees and attack them and flesh out what are the activities and behaviors in the portrait we can have as a plan?
That's, Terry, congratulations, you're now part of the, but yeah, I actually think what Terry was saying, I do see will be a big part of that next plan. This portrait of the graduate is a framework, that we're saying, here are these important traits that we think each graduate, as they are walking across the stage, will have strength and mastery in these various areas. As a district, we need to now reflect on where do we go and develop this from preschool through senior year. And I think that's going to be the big task over the next 3 years.
The only other thing I was going to say is, you said July or August. What's the timeline for, is that too late? I just feel like that strategic plan committee, and it's the end of June. It's not going to happen before July, obviously, but is that?
I think that would still give us time. I'm pretty sure the 3 of us could, at this point,
Your
plan
faces don't look
weddings
confident.
within a month.
Joy has the funny face on.
Yeah, and just, to, I don't know, allay any fears, like, it's not like we're not continuing work, right? So we've been operating with a strategic plan that ended at the end of last school year. And the leadership team, met at the end of met last summer and really developed some key focus areas, and we're going to continue to move that stuff forward. And the strategic planning process is going to really help to continue to inform that. And, it's our hope that we're going to be able to continue to roll that stuff forward and continue to take a lot of additional input. And it's going to help us just further, inform our continued our process and continue to inform the strategy moving forward. So, we have a lot of great stuff going on in the district. It's not like one strategic plan ends. Like, there was stuff that we didn't finish, and the district has got a lot of great stuff going on. So, I think it's going to be important to not rush the strategic planning process. We want to make sure that we get everybody's input and we do it thoroughly, and we make sure that we're not missing stuff. I think we do a pretty good job as a district, as somebody who has, keeps their antenna open all over the place. I think we do a really good job as a district of listening well and really collecting a lot of data, but we could always be better. So I really see the strategic planning process as a really good opportunity to really do that deep dive and really get a lot of stakeholder input to make sure the direction that we're heading is the right direction, and make corrections as needed, right? So
are we thinking this is this school year coming up process to kind of think end game could be spring?
I imagine, based upon the timeline that we're on, it's going to be kind of like where it ended up last time, is that we'll have something back to the committee, in the middle of next year, right? Because if you remember 5 years ago, I remember it launched, the big event was sometime right after I started, it was September-ish. And then by the time we came back to the committee with an approved plan, it was I don't remember the exact date, but it was somewhere in January or February when that got presented to the committee. So then it'll be and it ended up being a 3.5-year strategic plan. It was 18 to 21, I think, if I remember correctly. So I would imagine something along that timeline.
So even if you meet and you're coming back to the full committee for our August meeting, say, it would still be okay?
Because I imagine, just like with Portrait of the Graduate, it was, sort of in the fall heading into winter that we were having these meetings and then as a design team developing the plan or in this case, the portrait of the graduate, I imagine we'd follow that same sort of timeline and horizon so that, so that as we head into between probably February vacation and April vacation, we're bringing a product back that I imagine, has a lot in there about how we're moving the concept of the portrait of the graduate forward.
Okay.
Yeah, as,
Anything else?
oh, sorry.
Oh, sorry.
I was
Go
going
ahead.
to say, just that, as Mr. Russell alluded to, and Dr. Carpenter was just talking about, I think, and the committee talked a lot about, when we were talking about the portrait of the graduate process, the developing the portrait of the graduate is one thing. Implementing the portrait of the graduate is step two, which becomes a big part of the strategic plan. How do we do that strategically?
And I think we've repeatedly talked about how that portrait of the graduate is supposed to be this sort of North Star, sort of giving the district a direction to, to head in. So I think that's, I imagine that as we pull the leadership team together here in the next couple of weeks over the summer, this will be one of those big conversation areas.
It's on my vision board already.
Great. All right, so you'll pull subcommittee together, and then we'll hear back this summer. Great. All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Moving on to the approval of the MRMS donation to the Habitat for Humanity. There is a letter from Emily Nyrick, the STEM teacher at the Monomoy Regional Middle School, that talks about the funds that were raised at their first annual birdhouse sale that was last Thursday, June 8th, and they raised $312. That was not included on your letter, but we did just check with Mr. McMillan, and so they are looking for approval to give those funds to Habitat for Humanity. Ms. Seabrett Long?
I move to approve the donation of $312 to the Habitat for Humanity by the Monomoy Middle School fifth grade students.
Second?
I would second that.
All, any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? All right. Moving right along, we do not have any subcommittee representative liaison reports tonight, so moving right into Dr. Carpenter's report.
Just quickly in reverse order, I had my last meeting with our Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Belonging Advisory Committee on June 13th. The committee talked about having or putting together a presentation and coming before you somewhat early next school year to sort of talk about some of the things that they wanted to look at and address over the course of the year, and then hopefully come back and be on your agenda, with sort of a report out at the end of the year. So it'll be nice to have them be part of this. And it's, we don't have Christina here tonight, but it's been really nice seeing Christina and Molly Graham, our student reps at the table, really be such an important part of that, of the diversity committee. In terms of just recognitions, I wanted to take a moment to acknowledge the retirement of Sheila House. Sheila was one of those gems of our community that when I first came here, in the suburbs, we didn't have somebody like Sheila. We didn't have a youth counselor, and we definitely needed a youth counselor for schools or for towns, because schools are in session 180 days, and kids and families struggle 365 days a year, with some, and so it's nice to have that availability. But Sheila has been the Harwich Youth Family Counselor for more than 20 years. She's retiring from her position. She's definitely had an impact on the students and families of our community for years. And the town has hired Ashley Symington to take the reins is the Harwich Youth and Family, Harwich's Youth and Family Services, and we look forward to working with Ashley in the years to come. She'll begin that role on July 3rd, and then to close out the year with a positive note on a return to one of the more gray hair inducing aspects of my year, the Paris trip. On a positive note, families got a surprising check in the mail over the last week and a half, and I started to get some emails from parents that were very grateful. But Explorica World Strides did finally step up, I think, with the families writing letters and the superintendent reaching out to the company and the Attorney General's office reaching out, and NBC News doing a little report on the trip. But Explorica did finally refund the families for all but the cost of the travel insurance and the $99 non-refundable deposit. So most families got about another $450 that they weren't expecting back, and I think they were out, I think, $143-ish, which a parent wrote to me and did all the math, and they said all things considered, this seems pretty fair, and so I appreciate Explorica World Strides for finally getting there, and it was kind of a good news thing as we closed out the year.
All right, we do have one more action item, the student trip to Greece with EF Tours in April 2025 that Jeremiah Nickerson presented at our last meeting. We are looking to vote on that tonight. So I need a motion. Ms. Gray?
I would like to make a motion to approve the student trip to Greece with EF Tours in April 2025 with Jeremiah Nickerson.
Second?
Second that.
Any discussion? Ms. Ebert-Lauren?
I just wanted to see if we could put on our agenda regarding policies. I feel like we've been getting a lot of, since COVID, we've been getting a lot of proposals for trips overseas and all the things, and we had all the insurance stuff happen, and I think as a committee, we should take a look at if we have a policy on the trips and what that looks like, and maybe some type of framework around where we're going, who's going, how often we're going, why we're going, and maybe give it a little bit more, like I said, a little more framework, because I feel like it just seems kind of, not random, but without purpose. Like I remember there used to be the 7th and 8th grade DC trip. It was every year, it was 7th and 8th grade, it was with purpose, intention, local. I mean, it was in the United States, and we've moved away from that. We don't really have grade-specific trips.
Right.
We had the AP tonight, which struck me because I was like, yes, that makes sense to me.
Mm-hmm.
So I would just like to suggest that we maybe put that on an agenda, could be the fall or whatever, to just kind of explore if we do have a policy, or should we, or could we, and what that would look like. Thank you.
Great. Any other discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? All right, they can go to Greece. We have had the presentation of warrants, so I will entertain a motion for adjournment.
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? So we will adjourn at 7:54. Have a good evening.